Afternoon, everyone. Barton Jackson, him, Executive Director for National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, New York. Really excited for this lunch and learn, and can't thank you, Daniel, enough for jumping in head first since Phyllis introduced us during our February monthly mixer. So for those that are not familiar with the Chamber, we look to visibly advance the economic opportunity and voice and advocacy of LGBTQ plus households and businesses in New York State. And for the many familiar faces, so glad you could join us on a Friday, 12 o'clock, when it looks really lovely outside. It's a bit cold still, but I hear we're getting up to 80 on Saturday. So Daniel, thank you so much. Looking forward to some insightful conversations today from you and LuxCitizenship.
Cool. All right. Bear with me. I don't have anyone on my team to help co-host today. We got people out sick and everyone's busy, but I promise I know what I'm doing. I just might take a second to get there. Okay. Does everyone see another screen that has the title of the event now? Yes. Awesome. Love that. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining today. It means so much to have you all here for this unique conversation. I want to welcome everyone to the event by saying we're talking about something that has never really been discussed before. So I think the best way to start this conversation and to approach it is for everyone to just take a deep breath. Just take a 10-second breath and cut off the space that you were in before until now and get ready to talk about something you maybe have never talked about before. So here's the breath. We are going to be talking today about EU immigration processes for LGBTQ plus business owners. There's obviously a whole big world out there, and it's such a vast topic to talk about if you're thinking about moving abroad. So we are going to focus today's conversation really on the EU, but hopefully that's something of interest to all of you that are here. So about me, my name is Daniel Atz. I am originally from, okay, the photos don't work. It's fine. I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska. Normally there should be a photo of me here, but you can see me behind you talking in the screen. So I'm a dual citizen of the US and Luxembourg, and I also have leave to remain in the United Kingdom. So I have immigration authorization in around 35 countries in the world. I speak 5 languages, and I have myself lived in 8 countries. So before starting my business LuxCitizenship, my work was for the Belgian American Chamber of Commerce, where I worked with some of the predecessors to Barton. This was already about 10 years ago, where I helped businesses immigrate and move to the US. And then in my own business, instead of helping people come to the US, what I do is help Americans move abroad. So our company, LuxCitizenship, we're a team of 6. We were founded here in New York in 2018, really in 2016, but in fact, we didn't have a lot of clients until 2018. So I really say 2018. But we've helped today over 2,000 and a few days away from 2,100 Americans get dual citizenship in Europe. Specifically, what we do is we help people get ancestry-based citizenship in Luxembourg. So that's really specific. You have to have a direct lineage ancestor that came from Luxembourg. But the reality is that none of my clients to date that I know of have moved to Luxembourg. So if they've decided to move with their dual citizenship, they've moved somewhere else in Europe, and we've accompanied them in that journey. And I myself, having lived in 5 countries in Europe, I have a pretty good idea as a generalist of how the situation is to move to Europe, and especially if you are a business owner, especially if you are 100% business owner in the US, there are some really particular things that are going to apply to you. So one of the things that is unique about our business is, as a gay man, we are effectively an LGBT-owned business, and a big part of what I have done over the years is advocate, especially in Luxembourg, but in the European Union context, about some specific realities that face the LGBT community when they decide that they want to move from the United States to Europe. And so we're going to highlight today some of the things that different members of the LGBT community could potentially experience in moving to Europe, and things that they really need to know of in advance of such a move. So that brings us to today. And there was some event that happened potentially in the last few months that made you all want to participate in this conversation. We're not going to name that event, but I just wanted to name the emotion you might be experiencing, which I think is this one. So what is happening? According to Gallup, last year in 2024, 21% of Americans said they would prefer to move permanently abroad if given the opportunity. And what was unique about this is that it was a major increase of 4% from 2023 and 11% higher than in 2010. These type of jumps are unprecedented in the USA. Normally, a 1% jump was experienced. This is a poll that Gallup's been running for years. So already when it was run last year, we were already at 21% in the US. The biggest poll that has occurred in the US on this topic since an event that occurred in November of 2024 is the Talker Research Poll, which was published February 26th. And what they did is they're a national polling organization that did like a wide-ranging poll, 2,500 Americans across the country randomly selected. And the data that they got is that 17% of Americans say they want to move abroad in the next 5 years as of February 2025. Another 5% plan to move soon, which is like an undefined category, but that they're actively considering it. 2% of Americans had already started the process, and 25% of millennials expressed an interest in moving abroad. Super interestingly, from this data, they said that Midwesterners were the most likely region in the US to want to move abroad right now, and that East Coast and West Coast was tied at 16%, while it was 18% in the Midwest. I think if I can permit myself to talk about my business, LuxCitizenship, the people that came historically from Luxembourg to the United States, the ancestors that allow our clients to recover citizenship, they set up mostly in the Midwest. So it's been interesting for us because it's like, whoa, looking at the national figures, it makes sense that we are experiencing quite a lot of demand right now, because that's where people are that are apparently most interested. So as this topic of Americans who are considering moving abroad is coming up, it is definitely obviously being captured in the media around the world that a considerable population within this wider context of Americans who are all of a sudden expressing an interest to move abroad, that it's the LGBT community. Okay. Apparently it doesn't like displaying the images. It's a good thing it's mostly a text. It's a text presentation after this, but these were going to be articles from around the world covering the topic of especially trans and LGBT people wanting to move abroad. But I don't think it's a surprise that I tell you that there's a whole bunch of people, and this is a trend there's people effectively, it's an article from the UK about a British lawyer that is talking about how his whole business has been changed by the demand for LGBTQs plus people from the US who want to move to the UK right now. So talking about where do Americans that, American citizens that live abroad, where do they live right now? So the biggest populations are on our bordering countries, Mexico and Canada, where there's just over a million people, probably a lot are dual citizens. And then the next biggest country, interestingly enough, we start to get into Europe, and we see the UK, probably for cultural reasons, Germany, cultural reasons, but also obviously American bases there, Australia, again, cultural, and so on and so forth. So out of these, again, this presentation is really about Europe. So we see there is a lot of Americans that move to the UK. The UK is the country that is the only country that has a reverse net immigration with the USA. So every other country in the world has up until now, has had a higher number of people from their country moving to the US. And the only country in the world where it was the exception was the UK. There are more people that move from the US to the UK each year than the other way around. And the others, probably not our surprises, but just talking about where do Americans go abroad, we would probably want to add that while the populations, are not up there on this top list, over 100,000 American residents yet, the countries that are experiencing the quickest growth in Americans living there on a big scale. I'm excluding tiny countries that proportionately have a huge growth in Americans because of small numbers, but in gross numbers, the countries that are having the quickest growth in Americans move there are Spain, Portugal, and Costa Rica. Because we're going to focus on, okay, I'm going to exit out of this so that you can actually see what's going on, sorry for the technical difficulty. There should be a map of LGBT rights in Europe here that comes from Wikipedia. And after this presentation, I'll definitely send you a copy of the deck so that you can visually see it. But there's some really clear things that you should know that I can kind of summarize for you when it comes to LGBT rights. Here, this graph is not graphing at the same time trans rights because that's a separate reality. There's separate laws that there's countries that are in a better position on certain topics that are not as advanced, compared to LGBT rights. But here's the breakdown. Effectively, in Western Europe, pretty much everywhere except for Italy has, some form of gay marriage, some form of parental rights for same-sex parents, and then there is also inheritance that's considered in that. But effectively, that's everywhere except for Italy in Western Europe. I would say that Switzerland has been one of the countries that's actually lagged behind in equality rights, but is getting there. I think Austria has something of a similar situation in some respects. But it's pretty much that of the places that you would think in Europe where you might be considering as like the places that are most famous for Americans to go, I think you probably are already aware that overall LGBT rights are well protected in almost all of those places but Italy. In Italy, there is a whole bunch of rights that are missing. First off, you're not fully protected from discrimination in Italy in the way that you are, and really even in the moderate Eastern European countries. Then there is only registered partnership. There is not equal marriage, and there's very limited parental rights, and they are extremely anti-surrogacy. And it is something that is difficult to talk about, but is something that is sort of just has to be addressed. There's nowhere in Europe that allows for commercial surrogacy. In Belgium, they allow for benign surrogacy, which is to say that someone that receives no commercial compensation, so it has to be someone intimate to you that has a reason to render the service of surrogacy to you, such as a sister or a cousin or a very close friend, etc. That's the only country that permits surrogacy in Europe. And as a result, it is a barrier that LGBT families can experience, especially with same-sex male parents in immigrating to Europe. It's one of the subjects that we've had to work on most extensively over the years. So this kind of brings us to the topic of, okay, I guess I skipped over East Europe because East Europe is a mixed bag. The countries that belong to the European Union have standards set out by the European Union that are for equality. And not all of those countries have complied with all of the standards. And the way that the European Union can hold them accountable for not complying is through the courts, and that takes a lot of time. And then once the courts act, it's also holding a government accountable for something that they don't want to pass. And so it's more people, I think, in the LGBT community should, if they are focused on territories that put their rights first, they would probably be most in a match with countries in Western Europe. If you were considering that, like, for personal reasons, that immigration to an Eastern European country might be personally relevant for you, we can send you, we will send everyone the deck that kind of very quickly breaks down where the rights are and are not in Eastern Europe. But I'm going to dare to say that we're going to focus on Western Europe here. So here is the hold on, some of you can get directly into the the presentation, and some of you I have to welcome in. So as far as the challenges for LGBT rights, so here's the situation. Most countries in Western Europe have all the protections that you would imagine when it comes to LGBT rights, and some, in many cases, in certain aspects, are ahead of certain states in the US, or certainly the US at the federal level. But the reality is when LGBT people immigrate abroad, that different legislation is written in different ways. And so there are small nuances in the laws that provided for same-sex marriage and other LGBT related matters that it just doesn't work the same as in the United States. So let me present you with one example. So a same-sex couple has children through surrogacy, and depending on the state in the United States, either it's a pre-birth order or an after-birth order state. So either you go to a judge that gives a preemptive order before the birth of your child, saying that the birth certificate should never be issued with the birth mother on it, and it always has two same-sex parents. Or there's states that immediately you do emergency action after the baby is born, and you ask for a judge to seal the birth certificate with the birth mother, and it lists the two, let's use the case of male parents, and so you have a birth certificate that says parent 1, parent 2, and it has two male parents on the document. In European countries, first off, again, there's nowhere where surrogacy is permitted, so there's nowhere where they're even considering this hypothesis because it's adoption, but they get these birth certificates for the children of same-sex couples that only list the two male parents, and they say scientifically that is not true. And then they make a whole big stink about it. When in the US, in most cases, when you adopt a child, the ultimate document that the government hands over to you looks like a birth certificate and reflects just the two legal parents without any other mentions of any previous conditions. That is not the case in Europe. Like, they don't modify the birth certificate. And so it's like paperwork stuff where we present information in one way from the United States, and then you take it to Europe and it doesn't correspond with how they've framed out how LGBT stuff works there. And then there's an administrative hiccup. And sometimes it can end up unpleasant. In my experience in Western Europe, not talking about Italy, there's always a way to bring resolution to these questions. And people are usually sympathetic. And especially in the current circumstances, my impression is they've been particularly sympathetic. But it doesn't prevent certain automatically triggered things that are like unpleasant letters that are like, we need to do like a DNA test now to prove the paternity because we don't believe the birth certificate because it's not scientifically factual that there's two males that created this child. And these are the experiences that we've had over the years with our LGBT clients that can be challenging, but they can be overcome. So just going back to the bullet points of what are the challenges we've experienced, what are the things you might need to know about in moving to Europe. So the variation in legal rights and how it's framed, recognition of children through same-sex parents, recognition of the X gender marker on US passports. So I know this is a particularly sticky area right now. Over the years, we had to spend a lot of time going to governments and saying, we have clients that have an X gender marker on their US passport. Your laws only mention male and female gender. What happens when we make a citizenship application or we make an application for residency with a vital record or a passport that has a gender marker that doesn't exist in your laws? Because the reality is that the X gender marker practically does not exist in Europe. There's countries that have removed gender markers from documents like passports as a way to remove the state's interaction with the concept of gender, but there is minimal recognition of the X gender marker, and the U.S. was exerting through diplomatic efforts sort of pressure to recognize and setting as a standard that this was something that the U.S. was doing so that it should be implemented in other countries, and this is the way that the U.S. normally acts. We're now with a government that doesn't take this position. So there is not an out-of-the-box answer for people that have the X gender marker. In some cases, it's not even possible to enter the border of another country because their border software doesn't support recognition of a gender marker that's other than M or F. These are well-documented cases. I don't have an out-of-the-box answer for what to do for someone considering the complexities that are here, but I would say that my team, we're several members of the LGBT community on our team, and definitely everyone is sympathetic and it's a safe space. These situations are usually one-off and unique, and there's not really out-of-the-box answers for these questions, but we're available and we can make ourselves available to try to get answers for anyone that has questions around here. And that's the best that I can say to you, because most of the governments don't like hypothetical questions. So if we ask them, what will happen if someone applies with this, for a visa with this passport, they just stonewall you and they don't respond. And the only time you get information is when someone actually makes the application, and then they have to write standards around it. So a bit of a complicated one. The other thing that we want to bring up, of course, is that there is a question about healthcare. You know, I would say that it's true, as it is throughout the United States and Europe, that there are healthcare providers that have different views of the world, and it's easy to think Europe must be so socially far advanced compared to us, but it's not different than the United States, that there are healthcare providers that are more sensitive to this topic and that are much less. And so, especially if you're coming from New York, where there are public organs that can provide service, especially tailored or to the LGBT populations, and with sensitivity and knowledge, you would find in Europe that those kind of setups only exist in the cities that are equivalent in scale. So we're talking like Paris, for example, has those kind of resources. But in medium tier cities throughout Europe, you're not going to find necessarily those type of things, and this becomes particularly sensitive when it comes to the transgender, gender-expansive population, because the fact of the matter is that they need to take into consideration where healthcare is optimized for the transgender population, and it's just not true that it is the case everywhere across Europe. And so talking with the various transgender clients that we've worked with, one destination that keeps coming up over and over again is Ghent, Belgium, which has a long reputation for working on these issues. But there's also Amsterdam. We can send around a document so that even if you yourself are not transgender or part of the gender expansive community, you have some knowledge that you can help for people, because there's people that don't have these resources, and the more you know, the better. So we've kind of talked about the challenges both in the US and across the pond, but now let's talk about the part of like, how do you actually make this move? What are your options available? So listen, this is not a plug for my company in any way. For LuxCitizenship, either you have an ancestor from Luxembourg or you don't. But this is here to be a resource for everyone. So we're not just going to talk about ancestry citizenship today, but if you do have European heritage, and that is obviously the first thing that you should look into, is if you have a possibility to get an ancestry-based citizenship. There are 22 countries across Europe that have some form of ancestry-based citizenship, and their expansiveness or their restrictions vary widely. The reason why ancestry-based citizenship always exists is usually related to some historical fact within the country, like trying to fix some historical injustice. So, for example, during the Inquisition that occurred in Spain and in Portugal, the Jewish population was effectively expelled. And so now you can go back hundreds of years, and if you prove that you're of Sephardic ancestry, and very interestingly, a lot of prominent Hispanic names in the United States are Jewish, because, for example, I think it's Arizona was actually founded mostly by Sephardic Jewish people. So like Rodriguez, Martinez, those are actually names that have Jewish, Spanish Jewish heritage. But talking more widely, there's 22 countries. Countries that have more restrictive frameworks would be like France, Germany, and Spain. So actually, like, the biggest ones are most likely not going to be a good option for you for ancestry-based citizenship. All those countries, even by grandparents, it's pretty hard to get the citizenship. Like, really, it would pretty much need to be like paternal grandparents. But then there are countries like that have super open conditions, like Croatia and Luxembourg, where if you have a direct lineage ancestor to Croatia or Luxembourg, you might have a really good shot of getting dual citizenship. There's countries in the East, like Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, that have relatively open conditions. The Baltic countries have very limiting conditions, very, very limiting conditions. Hungary, you have to learn their language. So even if they have open conditions, you have to learn Hungarian. So I think, the ones that come up a lot, obviously Italy. Italy has relatively open conditions by comparison to Eastern Europe, but it takes a really long time, and you might need to sue now to get your case heard. So Italy is one where unfortunately a lot of people wait like 3 to 10 years. So if you're trying to leave the United States as quickly as possible, it's not exactly an express lane out of the country, but it might be something where you look for a short-term solution, and long-term, over the years, you go through this ancestry citizenship process, and you end up with the ability to permanently stay in Europe. So it's always, even if it's not your solution to get out of the country tomorrow, it's something that you should look into, because it's something that could be a permanent solution for you. There's someone waving. Yeah. Okay. A lot of people also ask me about Ireland. Ireland is just pretty much the grandparents or paternal great-grandfathers. So most people who had 1850s ancestors come over from Ireland, unfortunately, it's not really a good option for you. The last one that I want to mention that's not listed on here is, we know Romania also has a pretty open program, and now they're in the Schengen space. So now it's interesting for Romania, but it's not something, because they only recently joined the common travel area in Europe. We never focused on Romania before, so we don't have a lot of experience there. Okay, so then we need to talk about what are the other ways to actually make a move to Europe and potentially find a way to stay. So here is the first option that's pretty straightforward, and that might allow you to stay, might not. So it seems like it might not be the first thing you would choose, but student visas, most student visas don't have an age limit. So it depends, there's not European Union rules, there's country by country rules. So the difference in the rules in Germany and France is pretty big. They're not the same legal framework. But in some countries like France and Spain and Germany, they have you can literally just apply to do like a language program, and then that allows you to stay like medium long term, not necessarily out of the box long term, but it gives you a year to, I don't know, potentially move there and try to find someone you want to marry, or that you're working on your ancestry based program. But what is interesting in most cases, full-time programs like a bachelor, master, or PhD in Europe, those visas do usually actually come with work authorization at the same time. It might not be the case that you are going to end up with the right to stay after the program. It depends on the country, but they almost all actually let you work while you're studying. Then probably an option that's going to be one of the most popular for an American business owner that is considering moving abroad would be the digital nomad or remote work visas. So some of those are not very complicated to get, although due to demand, the lines are getting longer and longer. But the ones that I think really jump out as being super popular, Portugal and Spain have these type of visas. Croatia does as well. Estonia would be one that is also a very viable option. Definitely not the most interesting LGBT life there, but it's also not a place where it would be threatening. Greece and Romania are also options, not as popular options, quite honestly. The most popular for these programs are definitely Portugal and Spain. That means that they're going to have a longer wait. But usually the conditions that like they apply, like you have to have income coming from a source outside their country. So you usually have to document the clients that you have, or, you know, the history of your business. But then really otherwise what you have to prove is often a minimum amount in the bank, which might be something like $50,000. And then proof that there's consistent income coming to you, and that income is not coming from their country. That's pretty important. Then there is the option of work visas. So there's definitely American business owners, you know, that maintain a business in the US that they're managing remotely, but they find a way to get an employment visa for somewhere in the EU. So there's really specific conditions that are relative to each country for all those things. But the way that you actually get an employment-based visa in Europe is one of the few areas where it's pretty harmonized between all the different countries. Like effectively, they have to conduct a market study that proves that within their own country, but also across the European Union, that there is a lack of workers that have the skills that you have. And so there's a big advantage for people that work in the software and computer related industries, because they could say, well, listen, there's literally no one in your country that knows this software. And so we need to send this person from the US to Europe to work there. And that's one that works pretty well. So there's other options. You know, there's people that that they decide to teach English as a foreign language, and they get employed that way. That's definitely not an option everywhere, and most places you would have to have certifications for teaching English. But I do know of two people that, like, pretty much they have a business that's running in the US, and they're just kind of teaching English part-time in Europe, and that allows them to stay in Europe and start counting towards residency for a longer term naturalization. Let's see, next slide. There's a few countries that do have really specific, I am coming to set up a business visa. So that's not everywhere, but countries that stand out for having this would be Germany, France, and the Netherlands. And they have some varying levels of financial commitment. One that's not listed on there, but that I think is a solid option for LGBT business owners, is Belgium. They do require $350,000, but paid in increments, like invested in increments over time in a business in Belgium, and then that gets you over there. There's also, if you're not just any kind of business owner, but you also specifically have a demonstrated track in the startup space, like you have to have actually done something. But there's also specific visas where if like your thing is really startups, and that would be Estonia, Portugal, and Italy. There's another option again where this is something more for high net wealth individuals, where it's investment in property. These programs are they're criticized by the locals in many cases, and a lot of the governments are under pressure to end these programs. So we still put Portugal on here, but their program effectively is over. There's no real option to invest in a property, and that pretty much what normally happens in these programs is like you put down 500,000 or more euros, and then they put you in a golden visa where you might need to be in the country like 10 or 12 up to 16 days in the year. And then as long as you maintain ownership of the property, after a few years, that becomes permanent residency. And then a year after that. So normally it's like 5 years holding this property, you get permanent residency, which is like a green card for the US. And then usually it's like, okay, one more year that you own the property and you show up like 15 days in the year, you can apply for citizenship. But you see why people don't really like it is like it's not creating value for their economies. It's just holding a property there. And a lot of these people are never even physically there except for like 2 weeks in the year. And that, yeah, I mean, effectively it's distorting the property market. So I think that these programs still exist to some degree in Spain and in Greece and in Malta. Malta with higher expectations on the investment. But I think that these programs won't exist long term. There's no really such thing as a retirement visa, but obviously there's people that are thinking, I've ran my business my whole career and now I just want to go to Europe and relax. But if, as far as relevant things to know, there's this non-lucrative visa, and in Portugal, the D7. And these also tie into like kind of the startup remote work. There's kind of different visas for people that have passive income and people that are working remotely. So it kind of actually just falls in under the passive income, but that could be, you don't have to be retired for that. That could also be, I'm living off of investment income, you know. And then the last option, and I mean, I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but a solid option is you take one of these other options, get there short term, and you marry someone that keeps you there permanently. Or, you know, if you do have another relative, then if you had like a parent, you know, there are other ones, but the most obvious one is marriage. And this usually grants permanent residency, which can almost in every condition, certainly in Western Europe, result in citizenship. On the other hand, civil unions, because in Europe it's still very common for not just same-sex people, but for opposite-sex people too, to avoid the complexities of marriage and a messy divorce, they just get civil unions. Like 45% of young people get civil unions. But in most cases, a civil union is still valid for sponsoring for immigration for you to get in the door, but it might not be valid for you to eventually get the citizenship, like naturalize as a citizen. So marriage is going to be the one that's going to give you the most rights, but a lot of Europeans would prefer a civil union because it can be dissolved with like a page versus a whole court hearing. So just kind of putting these into categories, there's kind of like 3 general professional visa types for moving to Europe. There's 2 types that are related to family, and then there's the other ones, student, investment, and retirement visas. And we want to note again that these are all country by country situations. The only one where there's some similarities in how the rules work are employment-based visas. The rest, all the rules are written based on completely local rules. A couple specific things you would need to know before you would consider a move to Europe as a business owner. And this I think is key. First off is taxes. Taxes are a very complex topic when 2 countries get involved, and the rules are country to country. They're not US, Europe. So, you know, I'm going to skip down to the bottom of the page and talk about entity selection. So I have LuxCitizenship is a single member Delaware LLC. Well, that's a relatively innovative business type. And definitely some countries in Europe have written in structures like a limited company that are designed to imitate it, but it doesn't exist in every category. So I did a lot of work with a tax advisor to prepare moving to Belgium. for my single member LLC. Well, it turns out then once I moved to Luxembourg, after that, all the work I did to move to Belgium was for naught, because the way the taxes work in the two countries is so different. And Luxembourg doesn't have anything like a single member LLC. So there was each country has a tax treaty with the US about how they handle things, but Luxembourg's was also written before single member LLCs were really a thing, and it hasn't been updated. And so I was going to end up triple taxed. I was going to get taxed like an employee and tax on my company in Luxembourg. And then I was going to have to pay general taxes in the US. So this is something like if you own a business in the US and you decide to move to Europe, most likely the profits from that business could be taxed in the country where you're living in Europe, even if you aren't conducting activity there. So these rules change from one country to another, but they can have a huge impact on you as a business owner. So it's super important, especially if you have greater than 50% ownership in a US-based company, that you go and you find a tax expert that knows American taxes and that country's taxes, and they do an analysis of what would happen if you immigrated there. Because do you own property in the US? Be careful about when you sell it before you move to Europe, because if it's in the year before you sell it, that can then become a taxable event. If you sell it in the year before you immigrate to that country, in certain countries, that could possibly become a taxable event in their country as well. So these rules are country by country, and it's something that you absolutely have to find out before you would consider making a move. The other thing that would be super defining in your life is a thing that you maybe have never heard of before, but it's called FATCA. And the FATCA means the Foreign Accounts Tax Compliance Act, and it was passed in 2013 by a Democratic-led majority and signed into law by Barack Obama. And it, for me, is the single worst thing that the American government has ever done to me or any middle-class person that is deciding to leave the United States. It was a horrible overreach where they were like, instead of participating in open sharing of data between all countries, we are not going to do that. And instead, we are going to impose draconian rules on every other country about having American clients. And if they misreport about these American clients, we will level penalties on them that no one's ever seen before. And so what happened? The banks abroad were like, we only have a few American clients here. We're closing all of their bank accounts. And the thing is, FATCA applies not only to bank accounts, but it applies to all financial instruments. And so what happened is there's over 150,000 Americans living in France. And the ones that have been working for more than 10 years got a letter that was like, we are so sorry to inform you that due to American legislation, it is such a risk for us to hold your retirement account in this country that the bank's board of directors had decided to liquidate it. You must accept the early withdrawal penalties for retirement in our social country, which has way worse penalties than in the US. And there's no way for you to contest it in the French courts because it's a matter of American law. So you could see if an American court would want to take this matter up or not. None of them did. And so all these middle-class Americans had their retirement accounts liquidated, sent to the US with huge penalties withdrew. And to this date, I do not have a legal bank account in Europe, and I lived there for the last 6 years. I mean, it's a huge burden for Americans moving abroad. Huge. There are eventually ways, after like months of paperwork and proving that you're really staying in the country and that you have domesticated income and blah, 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 you might be able to open a non-interest bearing checking account. But I know people that have put 10,000 euros into escrow just to get one of these accounts. It's a really super complex part of moving abroad. Super complex. You know, bank cards are more and more adapted for international markets. You can usually get away with paying most things with Visa, you know, but eventually if you're going to rent an apartment, it becomes a real issue. Another thing that I would say, I know we're running down on time, so I don't want to talk the whole time. If you are an American business owner and you're considering moving to Europe, a super practical piece of advice: often you need to have proof of no criminal history from the US. And the CHRI from the FBI is fingerprint based. And due to digital, literally digital as in the digits of your fingers, digital privacy laws in Europe, they don't do anything with fingerprints except for unless you are arrested. There's no registration of fingerprint data in Europe. And so getting fingerprinted, getting ink fingerprinted to send your fingerprints to the FBI to get your rap sheet, your CHRI, super difficult to manage from Europe. So if you move abroad, you usually have to move abroad, then open your company or like register to be a freelancer to manage your business from abroad. You're going to need copies of your rap sheet. So it's something you definitely want to do before you leave the US. I'm gonna end up sending you all this breakdown of visas and where I think like it's most interesting to move in Europe compared to like LGBT rights and your visas and everything. I'm just gonna skip to the last slide so that you can see the core information, and you'll be able to review this in person once I send this to you. But here are my final suggestions for LGBT business owners that don't have entitlement to any kind of ancestry-based citizenship. I think these are the best programs for you to look into. The D7 visa in Portugal, the digital nomad visa in Spain, and the DAFT program for people that want to create businesses in the Netherlands. Several of my LGBT clients have started businesses in the Netherlands. They don't need to go through the DAFT program because they have dual citizenship, but it's a good destination to do it. And there's also options in France and Germany, but I think that there's more bureaucracy. And I think those are more interesting options if you speak either French or German. Whereas I think in Portugal, Spain, and the Netherlands, it's much easier to get by with just English. Okay, I know it was a lot of information to take in, and